treasure you seek is in the cave you least want to enter. So it might be a 10-year adventure that you know you ought to do. We back with another reflection on Daily Vedantic. I tried to say the Daily Vedantic, but now the muscle memory is there. Daily Vedantic. Did it again. Shout out to Danny, who loves it when I say it, and to my wife, who despises it. My apologies. We are products of our past, as they say. Got to be careful what comes out of our mouth. You know, that's actually very similar to how AI chatbots, that's how they work, is they look at just tens of thousands of football fields worth of data. Think of like 10 feet high football field of a data center. All of this training data. Now you could imagine tens of thousands of data that they have pulled in. Tens of thousands of these football fields, visual football fields of data that they've pulled in from the internet all over the world in I think ChatGPT is 26 languages right now. And the way that it works is in a very simplified, this is an oversimplified way, but directionally, this is how it works is you ask it a question, it starts to answer the question, and then it predicts with 99.9% accuracy that this should be the next word. And this should be the next word. 99.99999. This should be the next word. And this should be the next word. So it's just pattern matching what humans have said about any topic that you ask it about. It doesn't know what it's saying. It's just saying, with this amount of accuracy based on the algorithm that it has, which the whole algorithm of predicting what the next word should be, it's like 4 gigabytes for ChatGPT, meaning it can fit on a thumb drive. If you kept it to just English, you could put it on a thumb drive and ask it any question on your device without needing to be connected to the internet, because that predictability, they've condensed that many football fields worth of data down to this humans talking this way and on these subjects that we know XYZ about these different subjects. This should be the next word. This should be the next word. This should be the next word. All of that is not only too much information, but it's also to say that we should be careful of the patterns of our speech and actions, because it's written within us to almost preemptively predict what should the next word be? What should the next action be? Say certain things enough and it becomes muscle memory, whether it's Daily Vedantic or whether it is a penchant for lying or whether it is a penchant for encouraging other people. We just operate off of these patterns that we might have set up. Words we chose 19 years ago. The words we chose in a conversation 19 weeks ago. Still playing out its ripple effects and the patterns that are written within us. Okay, now back to the actual episode and the reflection that I wanted to have today. And that reflection is something that I find myself thinking about all the time within this philosophy. And this is something that Swami will say often at the ashram. He'll say that nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. Talk about setting a pattern. This phrase, nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. It's crazy how accurate and empowering and how rare an insight like this that I'd ever heard it articulated, that we think we're pleasure seekers, and yet so many of the things that we do, we know are going to make us feel like shit. You have that 4th or 5th or that 6th drink on a Saturday night. It's pleasure in the short term, and then maybe 8 hours of terrible hangover for the 3 hours of fun. It's not even pleasure in the short term that evens out with the same amount of 3 hours of discomfort on the other side. It's a net negative, and yet we do it all the time. We choose our senses, our appetites, so often over what our higher selves would say, you know what, that's my capacity to see the end in the beginning is telling me I probably shouldn't do this. And we think we're choosing pleasure, and yet we're choosing pain. And the opposite is true. When we think we're choosing pain, we're actually choosing pleasure. When you decide not to have that fourth or fifth drink, when you decide to hit the gym to start the day, to the outside observer, maybe even to a part of you, you think it's choosing pain, and yet it's liberation through deliberation, removing some freedom to offer strength on the other side, to offer a better Sunday on the other side. But what clarifies this even further is nothing feels as good as doing what we ought to do. If you ever needed a rubric or a framework to think, well, I want to feel as good as possible. Is it the gym sesh? Is it the 3 drinks instead of 4 or 5? Well, here's the rubric. Nothing feels as good as doing what we ought to do. And 99.9% of the time, we know what we ought to do. You don't need some Swami in India. You don't need some amazing mentor to tell you what you ought to do. Most of the time, we know what we ought to do. And here is the kicker within this knowledge bomb, this eternal principle, within this philosophy of Vedanta. It's not just a platitude. It's something you can try out 20 minutes from now. Do the thing that you keep putting off, that you know might take 3 hours. Just do it today. Do it 20 minutes from now. Do the thing that you know you ought to do. Maybe it's taking on a project that's going to take you 3 weeks. Maybe it is, as the famous Vedantin Joseph Campbell said, the treasure you seek is in the cave you least want to enter. The treasure you seek is in the cave you least want to enter. So it might be a 10-year adventure that you know you ought to do. But it's not just discipline or doing something hard. It's not doing it for a community. It's not sacrifice. What is so beautifully, radically simple and clarifying is that you get to do it for you. That no one will feel better than you yourself. You will never feel better than when you do what you ought to do. So simple, kind of makes you want to try it out, right? The beautiful thing about truth within philosophy is when you try it out, when you kick the tires, question it, go in skeptically if you want. But when you try truth out, it works. And I can tell you with enough experience of seeing it in myself over the last decade, seeing it in others, seeing how often that phrase gets repeated. The Venice Vedanta Club. It's one of the most powerful, actionable, motivating insights within this whole philosophy that's filled with them. This is one of the most powerful. Because it's not even about doing it for others. It's doing it for you, yourself. Because nothing feels as good as doing what we ought to do. And if you don't believe me, try it out. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. I almost said Vedankadong, but then my intellect jumped in. That's today's episode on the Daily Vedankadong. We'll see you next time.